Risk management and emerging profession. I need to strike a balance actually, where it's not about what I know, it's how much I make people understand that's more important. So I would like to start with an overview to risk management so that people actually know about what risk management is and the basic terminology of that. So let's start with the definition of risk. What is risk? Risk is an uncertainty that may or may not happen. Risk is an uncertainty that may or may not happen, and if it happens, the outcome could be a positive impact called opportunity, or the outcome could be a negative impact called threats. Opportunities are to be enhanced, are to be realized, are to be exploited. Threats are to be avoided, threats are to be mitigated, threats are to be transferred. Risk is an uncertainty. How do you define the term uncertainty? Uncertainty is a lack of knowledge about an event that reduces confidence in conclusion drawn from the data. What kind of conclusion do you draw? I say someone had a fall from second floor of a building. What could have happened to him? You say he might have died, he might not have died, he might have broken his leg, head, internal injuries. I tell you, someone had a fall from 100th floor of a building. What happened to him? No uncertainty. You say he is dead unless he turns out to be Rajnikant. Risk can also be defined as risk is an uncertainty that may or may not happen, and if it happens, it would have impact at least on one of the project objectives. If risk occurs, it's going to impact either the cost, the time, or the quality. Basically, with respect to risk, people are of three types. You have people who are risk averse, you have people who are risk seeking, and you have people who are risk neutral. All of us, we fall into one of these three categories, so check who you are. Risk averse is a person who does not believe in taking risks. Someone who is a salaried person, someone who does not believe in share market but he believes in fixed deposit is a risk averse person. On the other side, risk seeking people are those people who are influenced by Hollywood and Bollywood. You call them as entrepreneurs. नहीं तेरा नशेमन खसरे सुल्तानी के गुम्मत पर, तू शाहीन है, तू रिस्क सीकिंग है, तू शाहीन है बसेरा कर पहाड़ों की चट्टानों पर. This is what Allama Iqbal said, part of the poem which is directly related to risk actually. Why risk management? Okay, fine. I said risk averse, I said risk seeking. So you might now ask, who's risk neutral? Risk neutral is a kind of philosopher who would think the pros and cons and then would take a decision. Either he goes towards seeking or he goes towards being averse. Why risk management? Risk management, in simple terms, risk management reduces the likelihood of project failures. Why risk management? Because the process of risk management can actually shorten the project schedule and decrease the project cost. Why risk management? Because it's an emerging profession for reducing the crime and protecting the business assets. It raises customers' confidence in you and your company's services. It demonstrates proof of professional achievement. Any organization that effectively manages risk will experience significant benefits throughout a number of areas that include improved strategic and business planning, more effective use of resource, increased ability to deliver on time, fewer breakdowns, fewer shocks, and fewer unwelcome surprises. Risk. The types of risk. Basically, risk is of two types. You have something called as the business risk, that is the risk of gain or loss. And the other type of risk is the pure risk, that is called as the insurable risk. That's example of insurable risk. They come from the area of fire, personal injury and all. The next term is about the risk tolerances and threshold. See, tolerances are the areas of risk that are acceptable and unacceptable. Something that impacts our reputation will not be tolerated. That is called as the risk tolerance. That's worked out in consultation with the organization stakeholders. A threshold, on the other side, is the amount of risk that is acceptable or unacceptable. For example, a delay of 2 weeks is okay, but nothing more than that is a risk threshold. Now, coming on to the international standards for risk management. See, they're basically standards for risk management available in the world. You have something called as the practice standards for risk management from PMI USA. You have something called as ISO 31000. These are risk management guidelines. You have British standards 31100, and you have British standards called 62198. If your company wants to have a risk management framework, they would have to go for one of these standards and make a framework around one of these standards, or you also have option to pick the best features of these standards and make a framework for your company, and all the projects you do would fall under that framework. Risk specializations. When I was speaking to people that I need to talk about risk, then people started asking me, what risk? Like, I'm a surgeon, I'm from the police department. What do you mean by risk? So the point is, risk is a generic term again. Now, see, there are different specializations in risk. You have something called as the enterprise risk management. You have something called as the operational risk management. You have something called as the financial risk management, and you have something called as the project risk management. Enterprise risk management, operational risk management, financial risk management, and project risk management. Enterprise risk management, like I said, is to make a framework where you need to draft the risk management policy statement of a company. You need to come out with a risk management commitment statements. You need to define the roles and responsibilities of the people who would be working in the risk department. You need to develop the risk management plan and procedures. So all this comes under enterprise risk management, where you basically come out with a framework for the company itself. Operational risk management, as the name suggests, operational risk is a risk arising from execution of a company's business function. It focuses on the risk arising from people, systems, and processes. And then you have the financial risk management. Financial risk management is the practice of creating economic value in a firm by using financial instruments to manage exposure of risk, particularly the credit risk and the market risk. Other types of financial risk include foreign exchange, shape, sector, liquidity, inflations, etc. Now, project risk management. See, the purpose of project risk management is to increase the probability and impact of positive events, and to decrease the probability and impact of negative events. Now, the failure rate of project across the world is quite substantial, causing an irreparable loss to the nations. Most of the businesses have at their disposal the physical and financial resources, but still projects fail. One of the main reasons is that risk management is not an integral part of those projects. They take risk management as an overhead. Should they do it? Should they not do it? Should they invest in it or not? That's the reason why, there is a colossal waste of time and skyrocketing prices. Actually, some projects, they overshoot the budget by 200% in terms of the pricing and also in terms of the timelines. So the recent survey done by EY Ernst Young says that more than 96% of the companies do not have a risk management framework in the company. Big companies, in fact, very big companies, it was hardly like around 4 years back, the top management, after burning their fingers, they realized the importance of risk management. And then they went for a risk management framework for the organization itself. So now the point is, coming on to the processes of risk management. See, there are 7 processes of risk management. The first process is where you need to come out with a risk management plan for the project. You need to have a robust risk management plan for the success of your project. The risk management plan you prepare will have a methodology that would have the data source, that would say how risk management would be performed on the project. So you need to prepare a solid risk management plan as an outcome of the first process. The second process is to identify the risk. How do you identify the risk? Risk is identified through documentation review. Investigating the uncertainties from the area of cost, time, quality, communication will unfold internal risk of a project. Documentation review is you need to take a magnifying lens and look into the contract. What kind of contract is being given to your company? What terms and conditions have been laid there? Though you have a legal department, but sometimes what happens is a company would haste when they get an RFP, they go ahead and submit a proposal. But they really don't understand the meaning of those terms that have been given there. There was a company that took a project and it was clearly indicated in the SOW that the doors and windows should be heat resistant. But could be they did not realize what exactly was that. But when the project got into execution, they got to know that the cost of the doors and windows is more than the cost of the project itself. It happened because documentation review was not done properly. Risk is identified through documentation review. Risk is identified through brainstorming. Documentation review, you need to see the WBS, work breakdown structure. Did you miss something from the scope that did not come onto a WBS? And then to identify the risk, you need to go for Delphi technique. That's called consensus of experts. Right? Risk is identified through brainstorming, through SWOT analysis. Every company has its own strength and weakness. Based on the strength and weakness, there are opportunities and threats available, or they are there. So risk is also identified through one of the important documents that need to be reviewed is the stakeholder register. Who can impact your project to what extent negatively and positively? You need to have a fair idea about it. Projects fail if the stakeholders are not properly managed. You need to have proper stakeholder management strategies. So I said there are 7 processes of risk management. The first process, you need to come out with a risk management plan. The second process is where you need to identify the risk and put all the identified risk into a risk register. That's a document. And the third process is to perform qualitative risk analysis, where you do risk prioritization. If you have identified 2,000 risks using different tools and techniques, for each of the risks you have identified, You need to find out its probability of occurrence, and you need to find out its impact. When you multiply P into I, you get the risk score. Based on the risk score, the risk will either move on to the short list or the watch list. Shortlisted risk are high priority risk. Watch-listed risk are low priority risk. You do a qualitative risk analysis. Qualitative risk analysis is a subjective analysis of risk, where the parameters are like between something like low, medium, high. After you do qualitative analysis, then you do the quantitative analysis. Quantitative analysis for the shortlisted risk. Quantitative analysis is a numerical analysis of risk. Qualitative is a subjective analysis. When I say numerical analysis, you look at a risk like, what are the chances of this risk occurring? Chances are 30%, and if the risk occurs, impact will be $60,000 on the project. When you look at in this way, that's called numerical analysis. So you do a subjective analysis, you do a numerical analysis, and when you do numerical analysis, that includes you should be doing sensitivity analysis. Sensitivity analysis will tell you your enemy number 1, enemy number 2, 3 on the project. Risk number 1, 2, 3. You need to use a technique called as sensitivity analysis, expected monetary value analysis. When you have two paths in front of you, which one would you select for your project? Which path gives you a better monetary value? You have something called as decision tree analysis that you have to do as part of numerical analysis. So I said 7 processes. The first one, to come out with a risk management plan. Second process, identify the risk. Third process, for the identified risk, you need to prioritize them. You need to make a short list and a watch list. And then for the shortlisted risk, you do a further numerical analysis of it. And for the risk for which you did numerical analysis, the next process would be to plan risk response. For each of the shortlisted risks, you need to assign a risk owner and a risk action owner. Risk owner is the person who would make the contingency plan. In the event if the risk occurs, the contingency plan will be put onto the track. There will be a contingency plan, and if the contingency plan is not 100%, does not take care of the risk, rest of it will be taken care by a fallback plan. For example, say if they're making a stadium here, and one of the project team member, he says that, look, when we are putting the second slab, I'm afraid it's rainy season at that time. So that's been identified as a risk. Usually what happens is someone who identified the risk, he is recommended to become the risk owner. So now what happened is they have a trigger condition also, that if it rains more than 9 mm, then they consider it as a risk. Anything less than that is drizzling per se. The project got into execution, and on that faithful day it heavily poured. As per the communication management plan, this person will be immediately communicated, the person who is the risk owner. So the risk owner, he keeps doing his job coolly. He says, oh really, the risk occurred. He will take the contingency plan, put it on the track. The risk action owner has to be on the site, say within 30 minutes. He goes onto the site. By the time he reaches the site, he sees an helicopter, flying in. The helicopter is coming because that's part of the contingency plan. The contingency plan was where an agreement was made with the helicopter company that when the risk occurs, you need to be on the site in so much of time. The helicopter comes, it flies static on top of that structure for 1 hour. Most of the rain, the water evaporates. Whatever is left behind there in the pockets will be taken care by the fallback plan. There would be like 20 people with a bucket, sponge. They will run to the site, take the water, throw it out. That's the fallback plan. So plan risk response, the process is where you make the contingency plan, you make the fallback plan, and you also identify secondary risk. Secondary risk is a risk that shows up as a result of applying the response. This person said that, look, fine, when you bring in the helicopter here, I'm afraid you have skyscrapers besides this structure, and the blade of the helicopter might run into the adjacent building. So the blade running into the adjacent building is now being identified as a secondary risk that will only show up when you apply the contingency plan. So the first process, you plan risk management. You identify the risk. You perform qualitative analysis for the identified risk. You perform quantitative analysis after qualitative. Then you plan risk responses. Planning risk response is to come out with the contingency plans and the fallback plans. And then, after you make the contingency plan, the next process is basically to control the risk. When the project gets into execution, you need to do risk auditing, risk review. You need to check your contingency reserves. Funds that have been set aside to take care of identified risk is called as contingency reserves. And then you have something called as management reserve. Management reserve is funds that have been set aside for unknown risks that have not been identified. It is said that whomever you involve in risk identification, at least 10% of the risk will go unknown. Towards that unknown, you have a bag. On that it is written management reserve. Usually the management reserve is kept as 10% of your project cost. And contingency reserves are basically worked out. Contingency reserves are part of your cost baseline. If an identified risk occurs, you don't, as a project manager, you don't need to take permission from anyone. You already have a bag. In that bag you have like $1 million. This $1 million is to call that helicopter and all. You might have identified like 200 risk on the project. So there are going to be 200 contingency plans. And for 200 risk, you have the risk owners and the risk action owners. So you do risk auditing, risk review. You do reserve analysis, how much contingency reserve is remaining and how much risk is remaining on the project. My project is 60% done. Out of $1 million, I consumed $0.9 million. 40% project is still remaining, and my bag is almost empty. There's no weight in it. Now I start eyeing toward the management reserve. And the last process is about risk governance. See, risk governance is creating and enforcing risk standards, policies and procedures. It is creating as well as enforcing. It is governance. It is policing. Because we are not that good at following processes. We just won't have chance to bypass the process. And there are different risk management roles, like, people work as risk manager, risk analyst, risk coach, risk auditors, underwriters, and then you have risk management certifications as well. The risk management certifications, you have a certification called PMI RMP. The PMI RMP, the risk management professional, is from PMI USA. And then you have the other certifications called CRM, Certified Risk Management, and Certified Risk Management, assurance. You have those certifications there. So we're already running late on time now. So I would like to stop here, and before I finish off my talk, I cannot let this occasion pass by without thanking IEF for having invited me here today. Thank you so much, IEF, Saeed Bhai. I'm honored to be here. Thank you. Jazakallahu khairan.